Tonight's topic is about local artists. We have 4 speakers who will share their stories about being artists, where they get their inspiration, how they manifest their ideas into their work, and generally what it's like to call yourself an artist in Durango. Dan Groth first moved to Durango in 1998 and fully developed his style of surrealistic pen and ink drawings using sketchbooks, architectural illustration, and personal experience to create bizarre, disquieting, and often humorous pieces. He moved away for a while to Portland, Oregon, but moved back to Durango in 2011, and by then was creating large pen and ink pieces that took up to a year to finish. Feeling unsatisfied with the meticulous black and white nature of his art, he moved to watercolors, which segued into his current focus, collage.
All right, my name is Dan Groth, not to be confused with Dan Groth. You may have heard of Dan Groth, but he's not a very good artist. What I wanted to talk about tonight is art as a vocation. And this is something that I kind of just thought about kind of recently about, like, what did I want to be when I grew up? You know, if you asked me when I was like 10 or something like that, I would have said, oh, you know, ornithologist, which is, you know, study of birds, or, you know, any sort of like, you know, zoologist, marine biologist, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I ended up studying archaeology, actually. That's what I went to school for. And I'll tell you what I never said, if anybody asked me, I never said I want to be an artist. That just kind of this happened. And I'm going to kind of talk about how that happened. That's going to be basically sort of the subject of tonight's presentation. So yes, I did go to school for archaeology after there was a traveling exhibition of Aztec stuff that came through Denver back in the 90s, and I was in high school. I saw it. I was like, this is amazing. They had a full-scale, like not a full-scale replica of Templo Mayor, but it was pretty big, and so I was really inspired by the art and just the passage of time, this ancient stuff, and then just kind of the depth of humanity of it. And that's kind of it ended up really informing my life. I was an art minor. Halfway through my college time, I really, just through various stuff that happened, I really kind of found a deeper well to draw from for my art, and art became kind of a little bit more for the forefront. After I graduated from college, I tried to, I applied. I didn't just try to apply, I actually applied for grad school at CU Boulder. I did not get in. I did do a summer of archaeology out near Mount Shasta. It was really awesome, great summer. I tried to get the job back the next year. I messed up the application and they just threw it out because I didn't fill out some form. It's just government stuff. What happened is I moved to Durango again in 2002 and had something of an artistic awakening. When I say that, I don't mean just like making art, I mean like everything, like kind of music, performing, writing and stuff. So, and it was just sort of happened, and so it's cool that like Durango kind of gave me my inspiration, or is when I would say like my artistic career started in some ways. A couple months after I moved back, a friend of mine had or a future friend of mine, but I met him that night. He had this thing called a bad poetry night at his house, where people read bad poems that they had written in the past. I actually like wrote a bunch that night and read them, and it was kind of a hit. I've been sketchbooking my entire life, and so this was kind of like, around this time I was trying to take it out of my sketchbook. And so let me read this poem to you first, because it's really good. Have you ever seen a hen? I hate animals, but I love hens. I am joking, I love all animals, but I love hens the most. So anyways, I wrote all these poems, and then I decided to make a book out of them, and it was called Ornate Feelings, and this is just one of them. And I would say this is kind of the start of what came to be after this, is because I was just making these weird pen and ink drawings, and then I would eventually lose the poems, so to speak. But around the same time as this, I joined a band here in town. I'm a bassist. And that was like the first time. I've been playing bass for years, but this was the first time I was like, oh, I'm into this all the way. I love the immediacy of playing music, and really, it was what made me in 2004. Basically, was one of the main reasons I moved to Portland, Oregon. because I wanted to be in a band because I knew it was a good music scene, and just I wanted to live in a big city or whatever. So I did that. About a year in, I joined a band. It's kind of a very difficult time in my life, but I also was when I was starting to, lose the poems, so to speak, but I was keeping a narrative, sort of, I would say. So I started making these disturbing, I had some real issues with like women and like just being really afraid of rejection and all these things. And so I made, this is a piece called You Have Such Beautiful Hair. And it's just kind of like, yeah, this is just this really repulsive person with beautiful hair. Here, this is Ogre Loves Duck, and clearly the duck does not love Ogre. I just got kind of weird, I just started, like, it was just sort of like, let my mind loose, and it was kind of like, it got weird, but I also tried to make it funny, I made all those sharks, and then all of a sudden I'm like, well, how about we get a guy in here who can bring a little humanity to the situation. So after 3 years of being in the band, I quit. It was kind of done, kind of like, what do I do now? And then my bandmate, the guitarist, was like, man, you got to start doing your art. So I'm like, oh, cool. So I consider him the guy who got me into embrace the vocation of being an artist. I started kind of like focusing on that idea of like, how do I focus all this energy I had with, music and whatnot into making art? Because I have a lot of things I write and I do acting and stuff. So like, how do I put all that into art? So I was looking into grad school. So I actually, interestingly enough, met with a professor at CU Boulder, where I got rejected from archaeology. And she was it was like, I met with her for 30 minutes. One of the best, like, inspiring 30 minutes of my life. I never saw her again because I never applied for grad school. Because in the process of my last year in Portland, I got a great solo art show. And I realized I don't need to go to school to be an artist. I can be an artist and be a working artist, and that's what it's been since. I moved away to Boulder for a bit to be near my family, and then I moved back here in 2011. And oh yeah, I should probably start some more photos. So I kind of started going bigger. This is a piece I did in 2011. This is when I started going really big and getting I like worked on this for a couple months, put it away for a few months, and then returned to it. But all the while, I'm like, I'm kind of trying to like deal with my life, and I'm working at like a food service job. I felt really like down on myself for that. I thought like, oh, I'm such a loser. Why am I like, I'm a cook? It's just how it is when you're older and you're working that kind of job. But I'm also making this. So, but it's, and around the same time, I was also kind of dealing with some of the stuff I addressed in those earlier works of like, like having issues with like, whenever I had this like this on again, off again relationship when I moved here, and that kind of led to like, examining some of that stuff through art again. With this one woman, I feel like this was in between our two stints in a relationship, and this one kind of feel like it captured something of that. And then the following year, this is kind of where like this is like brings into some like current events for me. After our final breakup, I had a really difficult way of dealing. It was just really difficult. Like a lot of emotions were right in the surface, and I kind of met somebody else who was really cool. And I don't know. I went back and read my journal from that time because I've been journaling since I was 18, and I was like, oh man. And I ended up creating this piece, which I consider to be my best piece I've ever made. And it was the thing about this piece though is I just sold it, which is like a really, really big deal for me, to have sold what I consider the best piece I ever made. And it was to an old college friend. And I always thought, like, when am I going to sell this piece? And who's it going to be? And it turned out to be an old college friend who just went through a really bad divorce. And I went up to the Front Range, and we, made the exchange, and I told him all about it, about the circumstances behind it, and it was really powerful. And to me, that's what makes being an artist as a vocation like worthwhile. It was one of the most meaningful events in my artistic career, is that to sell the piece I like the most to a friend who actually expressed basically what I felt like was my intent, and it was really great. So anyways, I feel like that was the high watermark of that whole situation of, me trying to, like, how do I express stuff, these interactions between two peoples that are so difficult. And so I feel like this one, it has some, like, a lot of my stuff's real heady and introspective. This one has a little bit of fresh air into it. And I feel like it's really symbolic for me, feeling I'm a little bit of a turning point in my art life that I passed this on to somebody I know. And then a couple of years later, I made this piece, which a lot of people think is my best, but I think it's like, I just see this and there's no joy in it. I spent so much time on it. It took almost a year to make, and it's a great piece. But yeah, around that time, I started trying to make watercolors, and that was just kind of an expression of me wanting to be having more like fluidity and kind of like music, it's more immediate expression. Watercolor got old, so I decided, like, what if I cut it up? So here's some mistakes, some pieces I didn't like that I made when I was in Portland, and I cut them up and made it into a different piece, and that inspired me to make art that I could just cut up. It's like you can make paintings and then cut them up and paste them again. It's great. In this one, I just made 5 big pieces and cut them up, and then it turned into this. This is a piece that I just made, this most recent thing that's going to be at the Durango Art Center juried show. And yeah, that's where I'm at with my art. One last thing, I sometimes go out into the wilderness and take pictures with a Grimace doll. All right, thanks everybody.